Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for the fourth day of our fourth annual Inclusive Excellence Week here at the School of Dentistry at Virginia Commonwealth University. I am delighted that we have Reina with us today. I actually had a chance to be a student in a class that Chris led as our instructor when I did a certificate in diversity and inclusion leadership a couple of years ago here at the university, and was really impressed. He was a great instructor and very engaging. So he is the founding and executive director of the Institute for Transformative Leadership and an associate professor in the Department of Management and Entrepreneurship here at VCU. He holds the position of Provost Leadership Fellow within the Office of the Provost and is also the Faculty Director of MBA Programs. His research focuses on the intersection of leadership, mindfulness, and emotions in the workplace and how they aid employees and organizations in order to facilitate employee engagement and organization performance and well-being. He's especially interested in understanding the impact of leadership on followers and how this translates to customer and patient outcomes. He received his Ph.D. in Business Administration and Management from the W.P. Carey School of Business at Arizona State University and has corporate experience in leadership training and development, as well as sales and marketing in the healthcare industry. So I present to you Dr. Christopher Reina. Thanks so much for joining us. We have a room full of students and faculty and staff, and as well as a few folks on Zoom virtually as well.
Wonderful. Thank you for the introduction and good to be with all of you. I see some familiar faces on Zoom and in the audience and just wanted to make a quick check. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes. Excellent. Well, what an honor to be here with all of you and to really be on a journey. I'd like to have a conversation and facilitate a thoughtful pause, if you will, in the chaos of our days. As we see and do so many things, we often come and go and don't ever have a chance to reflect. And so what I'm hopeful for in this time and in the way that I've structured the time together is that we can stop and remove devices and be together in an experience, maybe a transformative experience, if you will, in which we think deeply about some things we don't get a chance to think about, but yet we know really make meaningful impact in the way we show up in our work and in our home lives. So with that, you may be wondering why I have no slides. I find that slides tie me and tie you to sort of a certain journey, and I love to go where we go as a group here together. So I love to hear your questions and your thoughts and your ideas, and we can kind of pivot and create a journey as we go together. But I was thinking about this word belonging, a word that I use often in my research, a word that comes up often in the discussion of diversity, inclusion, equity, and often now belonging as a fourth word. And I was sort of meditating on this word this morning before speaking, and I kind of saw a new insight into the word itself. So I would just wanted to maybe turn to a neighbor for a second and just answer this question. What does belonging mean to you? The word belonging, think about it. And what does it mean to you? What does it feel like for you? When might you have experienced a deep sense of belonging? And maybe when have you experienced less than ideal senses of belonging? So I just want to take 1 or 2 minutes. Let's center together on this idea of belonging, something we probably know what it is, but it's probably hard to describe. So take 2. Let's experience this together, and I'll be back with you in 2 minutes. So I know there's probably more to discuss, but would love to just hear a couple of thoughts. I'm hopeful that I can hear the folks in the in-person room, and then we also see some great comments populating in the Zoom chat. This idea that Suzanne mentioned, this being part of a group, being accepted by others or a group. Others like to weigh in. What does it feel like to be in a place that we belong? And what does the word belonging kind of conjure up for us? Yeah, I see the hand. Please jump in.
I'm still feeling like a valued member of a greater group and that you are important and listen to.
Okay, so heard and listened to and valued and special. So those are feelings you use to describe what it's like to experience belonging. Wonderful. A couple more comments. Let's continue to dig on this.
I'd like you offer a contribution.
So as if I maybe didn't hear the beginning, but it sounded like you said able to or maybe resourced in order to create a contribution.
Right.
We thought it was about feeling respected and being seen and heard, having compassion directed towards us for the appreciation of where we are in whatever process it is that we're in.
Wonderful, wonderful. Appreciation is a word that I heard. For the first time, which is interesting to me, I study this word a lot, and I study mindfulness and I study leadership. And if you have studied mindfulness or know a lot about mindfulness, you often hear that mindfulness is about being, not doing. And so I think I'm cued always to think about the word being. And when I saw belonging today, I saw two words. I saw be and I saw longing. I saw longing, this idea of yearning, of wanting, of needing, of really being a human fundamental requirement that we can be. Belonging, a yearning, a need, a human requirement that we can be, and based on the words that you use, be ourselves, be authentic, be heard, be valued, be seen. Interesting way that I saw that word for the first time today, as I just took a step back, which I think is indicative of what mindfulness asks us to do and what leadership asks us to do. Is there's often ways we go about our lives that have seemed okay, have seemed correct, have seemed routine, and it's a bit of autopilot. And as we kind of live into creating spaces and places of belonging, it's how do we interrupt some of that? How do we take a zoomed out perspective so we can see things in new ways and be willing to go through the door of trying it out? So with that perspective, I ask you today, what is one thing you don't know yet, but be on the lookout for it when you hear it or see it? What's one thing today that'll surprise you that you can take, that maybe reorients your perspective on a way you've heard a word or thought of a concept? Or maybe it's a concept, an idea that's shared by one of your colleagues sitting next to you, their perspective. But I encourage you to be on the lookout for the one thing today that might shape something differently for you, or the way that you think about something when we talk about the topics of leadership, of belonging, of mindfulness. So with that in mind, I have three really broad objectives. I like to kind of chart the way and know where we're going. I believe in that sort of North Star approach. And then how we get there, the journey itself, is the way that we kind of create it together. So my objectives, and I hope that you'll join me in these, is an opportunity for shared connection and experience. I hope this is an experience. Leadership to me is about crafting experiences for other people. We often remember experiences vividly, they're emotional, they're highly connected to others. And I think we'll see throughout this talk that when we experience transformative experiences, then we're changed in the process and we're deeply connected and there's compassion. And we often feel that we have a place of belonging. So there's all these ideas that are interestingly intertwined together. Second, I want to introduce you to the topic of transformative leadership. If you've studied leadership, or maybe not, maybe you just know the word colloquial leadership. What I'd like to do is introduce a framework for thinking about leadership. And that's really about all of us being leaders in all things that we do every day. It's not a position. It's not a title. It's not something that we earn. It's really a mindset. If we embrace the mindset of leadership, then we know that we're sort of on stage all the time. Whoever we are, wherever we are, whatever we're doing, is influencing other people, whether we know it or not. And as we'll dig in a little bit later, influence is really key to leadership. So we're all leaders at all places at all times. This isn't reserved for finally making it to a position of management or having a title, a certain title behind your name. It's really a conversation that I'm inviting all of us into, and also into the difficult work of leading. If we're all leaders, then we're all doing it all the time, and it's all challenging. So with that, I invite you into that second objective. And the third one is about sort of your unit, specifically the School of Dentistry. What does it look like as you craft, as you, the leaders of your unit, craft and create a continually an environment in which a culture of care is embraced, where people feel a strong sense of belonging, whether that's patients, whether that's students, whether that's faculty or staff? What does it look like to create that place? Hopefully today is a start and a continuation of the work you've been doing all week, and sort of answering this question: how do you create places where people belong and feel inspired and want to be? So thanks for indulging those three objectives. Be on the lookout for us to cover those. But how we cover them, I'm open to going in many different ways. And so one question that I pose to the group right now is, let's get to a common definition of what leadership is. I gave you some hints that it's not position and it's not powerful. It's not being powerful, rather. But what other ideas do you have about how do we define leadership? I think it's important that we're on the same page on what that is, because that invites us all to the conversation and doesn't let any of us sort of say, oh, well, we're not leaders. So let's create a common definition together.
Positive leading by example.
Leading by example, mirroring the behaviors, emotions, and thoughts that we would hope others would do. We hold ourselves accountable to those same aspects. Okay, good. What else?
Mindset for mentees and all.
Could you repeat that? I said a mindset of
Growth mindset for mentees and all involved.
Okay, so I heard inclusiveness. There's all involved. We think of a broader expansion of who is involved. I see in the chat also inspiring others to reach their full potential and really bring out the best in them, and then in turn sort of be those positive change makers for the next generation of folks who are leading. A couple more comments. How do we define leadership?
Making people feel safe in a group.
So creating was that creating strength in the group?
Safety and strength, yes.
Safety. I love that word, thinking about, if and when we say and do the right things and support people as leaders, people feel safe to be themselves, to think deeply, to be innovative, right? If we think about the opposite, if we're scared, if we're nervous, if we are worried that the organization doesn't support us, right? Those lead us to think in very different and sort of shallow, routine ways. And so we're not really at our best. And then a general comment into the chat, just this leadership maybe is this ability to influence others. Good. So let's stop there and let's tie some things together. So influence, I believe, was a word that kind of came across in all the definitions. Maybe we used influence or we used inspiring, but this idea is that who we are and how we show up affects other people. So it's not about us as the leader, it's about others and us and the situation. And so this idea of leadership really being understanding self, understanding others, and understanding the environment is a way that I'd like us to think about leadership. And that's kind of all of us all day, every day, who might like to, by show of hands, like to influence their partner at home a little bit more effectively. Anybody kind of in that boat? I see a few hands. See some people looking around. So the idea here is leadership defined as a set of influence behaviors is a really nice way to package this idea, this complexity of leadership. And just before we start, I like to jokingly say that, I study in the social sciences, and we often say, if we can predict human behavior about 30% of the time, we're doing really, really well. If I wanted to study kind of the way things always work, then chemistry would have been a really good field for me, which 99.999% accuracy, we know how things will bond and react and play out, and humans are really complex. And so as a fun aside, think about that complexity of human nature and think about leadership as really being a way to influence others. And by defining it as a set of influence behaviors, we're not saying it's about the person themselves. It's not who they are. It's not how they were born. It's not what resources they were born into. It's really a journey toward getting better and practicing a set of influence behaviors. So there's no specific way we can show up as a leader. So that should make everyone feel simultaneously good and maybe a little bit of a burden, because that means we're all leaders at all times and all places, because we're all potentially exhibiting influence behaviors all day, every day. So it happens every class in my MBA journey. When I bring students into the program, they say, I think leadership's interesting. I want to study it. I want to be a follower. And so, I'm happy to take the class, but, I don't need to be a leader. And I think by the journey throughout the course, they recognize, well, it doesn't matter whether we want to be, we are exhibiting influence behaviors all day, every day. And with that knowledge comes the power that we can improve, we can get better. Which of our professional athletes does not have a coach? And which of our amazing professional athletes that we like to watch does not practice every single day to hone their craft? Leadership is no different. If we are wanting to be better and more compassionate in the ways that we show up with individuals, to bring them at their best, to do all the things you said, inspire others to reach their full potential, to help people feel accepted by the group, to see and hear other people and create belonging. I'd like us to think about leadership not as some scary thing that some people do and some people don't, but rather an activity set, a practice that we can all lean into and all improve, and we all should improve. And it's worthwhile to bring our attention and our time to honing this art and science of leadership. So we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about what leadership is. It's a set of influence behaviors. Hopefully everyone feels that they're part of the conversation, because we're all doing leadership behaviors all day, every day. And then I want us to now think, as we craft the story together, what do the best and most effective leaders make you feel? So
Worth.
looking back, say again, important, good.
And worth.
And that we have high worth, good.
Respected.
Respected. Understood is coming in the chat, and respected. What about the least effective leaders? And I jokingly say, if we're thinking about the least leaders, that was a former institution, not our current institution. So think back. What does it look like when we experience an ineffective leader? How does that make us feel?
Alone.
Alone. You think about belonging as this yearning for connection and place and to feel supported. Quite literally the opposite of alone. I'm seeing in the chat, ignored, uncertain, belittled.
Excluded.
So, excluded. Ooh, tough one. So I like little ebbs and flows as we connect. So we had some positives and we had some negatives. Now, who, by a show of hands, wants to make anyone feel anything regarding the words we just said? Alone, ignored, uncertain, belittled, not valued. Anybody in the room want to make that happen? No, hopefully not. I'm always nervous that someone's going to raise their hand, but I'm glad no one did. So that's not what we want. And I would venture to say that there are a lot of folks out there who would agree with you and that they don't want that to happen. So why? What gets in the way? If leadership is a set of influence behaviors, and the goal of leadership is to make people feel included and belong, and that they have a place, and that they can bring their best, and they're inspired, and they're engaged. We all agree on that. You all told me all of that. We know that already. So it's pretty darn simple. Yet, and then you just said nobody wants to make people feel the negative stuff. So why does it happen? Why is leadership the most often observed and least understood phenomenon on Earth? As one scholar put it. Why? What is going on? Yeah, I see some folks on the on my bottom left. I'm not sure if
No,
that.
you're fine. When you take yourself and you think you are more important than everybody else.
Okay. So we see this system being disrupted. Remember, we said leadership is about self, it's about others, and it's about situation. And what I hear you saying is, when it goes wrong, a person, maybe the leader, thinks that they are too big, or that they don't see or have space for the other or for the situation. Okay, so it's an unbalanced equation in our three-part equation. Okay, that's great. What else?
Fear and uncertainty.
Uncertainty. So the leaders create that uncertainty.
Mm-hmm. And maybe they have a little fear themselves of maybe sharing the responsibility, feeling like they need to do it themselves.
Right. So we have expectations. We put expectations on ourselves, our culture, our world, our way of moving up in organizations creates these expectations that now we have to perform, or that we have to do, or that people need us to show up differently. Interesting, right? So expectations, fear, uncertainty, ego is the word that maybe I'll insert for the first comment. This idea that we're bigger than or know better than other folks. Anything else we're missing? What else gets in the way?
Lack of protected time to learn how to be a leader.
Thankfully, there is lots of opportunity, I think, to learn. And I try not to make too many jokes, but I often say that I don't fear, I don't have fear that leadership consulting and work will ever go away, because I think it is a journey for all of us. So job security for me in that, but your point is well taken, right? And as we get into it a bit, the idea of transformative leadership is really getting at exactly the point that you just raised. And it's saying that our organizations, on average, in most ways, at least in Western organizations that I study most often, the goal is to do stuff. Remember, it's not about being, as mindfulness teaches us, it's about doing. Some say we've developed in this idea that we're human doings, not human beings, but really our whole way of showing up in life should be about being, experiencing, and it often becomes a set of expectations around doing. Now, I'm quick to say we're in organizations, we have financial metrics, we have to meet patient needs, we have to have patient outcomes and satisfaction. I mean, we have real metrics, we have to do it. And so there's nothing that I'm introducing today that I want anyone to think I'm saying we don't take care of the business part of what we're doing. I think the transformative leadership model, though, says exactly what the person said last. It's this idea of flipping it on its head, perhaps. You didn't say this exactly, but this is kind of where I want to take it. This idea that transformative leaders develop deep and caring relationships and view leadership as this journey and this practice, first and foremost. And because we have those deep and caring relationships and people feel a sense of belonging, then they perform really, really well and do great things, right? So it's being first, which leads us to do good and do good things, right? And so what I heard you saying is that we don't have the time, we don't have the reflective ability, we don't have hours like this often where we can slow down, we can work on self, we can take one key learning and work on it. I mean, we hear a lot about, the word micro, and it's usually followed by something that's negative. I'm trying to build language around micro corrections. How do we look at ourselves as leaders, as humans, and say, what do I want to micro correct? It's a big, daunting task to completely change who we are, and we probably don't need to. None of you raised your hands that you want to hurt people, which is good. We don't have to change that. We just have to work around the edges to make sure that our words and our actions and our behaviors don't unintentionally hurt people and create spaces where they don't feel they belong. So this is a series of micro corrections of things we can just work on around the edges. And in doing so, that actually brings about transformative change, but we don't have to kind of completely swing that pendulum. And so if you're hearing things today that are maybe new or surprising, I hope you feel that you can jump in and start right away today. You can start thinking about this idea of leadership differently. And by doing that, it means you show up differently with people. If we recognize that we have a huge impact on everyone around us at all times, or at least we could, maybe we'll watch what we say a little bit. Maybe we can take a pause when that email comes in and that makes us very frustrated. And yet we can put it into perspective with some time and space, and we don't have to immediately push back the send button. Okay, so I hope that you take some real practices that you can use in the space of transformative leadership from our short time today. And it's a 1 hour entry session. I hope it intrigues you. I hope we can do more work together. And so now that we've covered some of the barriers of being transformative or being effective, I want us to think about this idea of mindfulness, because all the things you just said about what gets in the way, I think mindfulness can be an antidote to. If we said we don't have time to reflect, well, mindfulness says perhaps that's the most important thing we can do. How do we show up more intentionally to connect with other human beings? And how do we center ourselves around that? How can I start a meeting? And I encourage leaders to do this. What is your goal in this meeting? And I'm not talking about the stuff you're going to do. I'm talking about the way you want people to feel. And if every meeting in your head you say, I want people to feel supported, that's great. It doesn't have to be a new feeling every time. But as Stephen Covey says, and other scholars and practitioners say, we really have to set our intention, our North Star, declare what we want to have happen, and then it will likely happen. If I show up and own that I want, and I did this before the session, that I want all of us to experience something potentially transformative, that I want to show up and listen and care and inspire you to think differently about leadership. That's what I wanted. That's what I put out there. That's what I prepared to do. And I believe, at least for some of us, that may happen. So we have to start with the end in mind. That's something you can do now before you see a patient, before you work with a student, before you start a meeting. That's a decision. It's a mindful, intentional decision that we make. The mind is made to think, it thinks all the time, yet mindfulness begs us that we can actually be much more in control of our attention than we think we can. So do we have any questions so far? I've given a lot of ideas, maybe your head's buzzing, or maybe you're just like, well, what's next? And that's okay too, but any questions that might be coming up for folks? How many of you are paying attention? Okay. Okay, so I asked the question because we're not really good at paying attention, and that's okay. A 2010 study actually said that 46.9% of the time in 2010, it's 2023 now, it's probably a lot worse now, but only 46.9% of the time are we actually paying attention to what we intend to be paying attention to. So only about half of you are actually really listening right now, and that's okay. And maybe I'll say something inspiring in the next minute and I'll grab the other 50% of you and then I'll lose another 50%. Point being, our attention is a little squirrely. It runs away from us. Just because that's the way it is, it doesn't mean that we can't work to improve it though, right? Think about this since you're in the School of Dentistry. It's a funny example. I always use it, but it's even more funny now. Think about brushing your teeth. You know you're supposed to do it. You know you're supposed to do it for a certain amount of time. You know you're supposed to do it a certain way. And so you do it. And yet you probably don't think about doing it. And yet if you switch hands and do it with your left hand or your right hand, depending on which hand is dominant, it probably feels like a very different experience. And it probably feels pretty uncomfortable. And it probably feels strange and you probably don't want to do it. And yet if you do it long enough, it becomes second nature also. And so I liken mindfulness to that. A lot of people will say, you know, I get it. I need to be more intentional with my attention. I need to press pause a little bit. I need to slow down the mind. Those are all great things. I get it. I just, you know, it's not really for me. And I kind of say, really, it's not for you. Who doesn't want to be more intentional with how they pay attention? Because one thing I know is I don't have infinite attention. I don't have infinite money. I don't have infinite time. And I don't have infinite attention. And if I think of attention as a fixed pie, as we move into holiday season, I'm big sugar. I like lots of sugary things, and they often come in circular shapes, and pies are about to be what I'm eating next month. And you know what? I'm a nice person. I like to share, but I like to share within reason. And if I think of my mind as this delicious pie, and I can only divvy up those pie pieces so tiny, am I really being intentional and mindful about who gets a piece of that pie? Or am I just sort of letting anyone and everyone take the pie? Silly example, perhaps, but maybe it resonates in the way that it's a fixed pie of attention. How are we allocating it? And are we giving the biggest pieces of the attentional pie to the people, to the processes, to the relationships that matter? Or are we experiencing major drain in which multiple entities, issues, emails, stressors, people that shouldn't be in our mental space? What if they're taking all of that attention and we're not actually paying attention to the things that really matter most? Think about that for a second. Mindfulness is about us being more in control of who and what gets a slice of our attentional pie. I've never met anyone who said they don't want that. Now, where we get caught up is people say, well, I don't want to meditate, or I don't want to, you know, it's weird, or, you know, I don't get it. And I love that discussion, because we can talk about ways to be more skillful with your intention and attention. And it doesn't necessarily mean deep breathing. I think it's one of the most powerful ways we can do it. I think given your careers, you likely understand and know a lot of the science behind it. We know how the body and mind are intimately related, and relaxing the body and relaxing the breath also calms the mind. We know that we have hormones in the body that create stress, or that stress creates, and that we react to, and then we close down our mind and we don't think creatively, and we're running and hiding from scary things, not physical things, hopefully, but mental things and psychological things. And so fight or flight response is very real. And so we know that's all true. And then we also know that for fight or flight response to work well in a well-adjusted way over time as humans, we have to have a come down off of the fight or flight response. We have to return to baseline. This idea in this book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. This idea that zebras experience very dangerous things. They run away, they either get eaten or they don't, but they go back to baseline and they don't hold on to that stress response. It comes and it goes. So humans need to do the same thing. Stress responses come and go. They need to happen. They're important. They're vital. Yet, how many of us are running around at all times, at all places, so stressed that we never have a return to baseline for our fight or flight response? That's what mindfulness can help us get into. That's why taking the moments of quiet and calm can help center us. That's why beginning with the end in mind, setting an intention for the day, for the class, for the patient experience, for the meeting, goes a long way in making it so. We also talked about this idea of ego, and I want to bring that in because mindfulness, what gets all the playtime in mindfulness, and much of my research is seeking to move the discussion beyond, is this idea that mindfulness is just about attention. I'd like to introduce the idea, and maybe this is one of your key takeaways, that mindfulness is not just attention, it's about the quality of attention. So if attention is the what, the how, I think it's equally, if not more important. Another way to say it, attention is necessary but not sufficient. We have to allocate our attention skillfully. That's the attention part. But there's also this other aspect that I call decentering that figures prominently into being and embracing mindfulness more deeply. And so one of the individuals in the second row, I think, said this idea. I don't think you said the word ego, but you said maybe a self-inflated idea of self, or taking up too much space in the room. And really we could call that ego, perhaps. And if we think about what decentering is acknowledging that we are only one piece of a larger connected whole, whether that's a department or a school or a university. It doesn't matter where we sit and what our role is. We need everyone around us. They need us, and we are part of that connected whole. And so if you think about a zoom lens of a camera, I'm a big iPhone person, and we just got the new iPhones, and I made the difficult decision not to get the big one, even though it had the better camera. I hate when Apple does that, but it still has a really good camera. And I love taking a picture or just holding the camera in my hand, which I'll do right here. Oh, you can't see it, but I'm holding it up. And I take the same picture from 3 different little camera zoom lenses, right? We quite literally see the camera is taking the same picture, but it's zooming at different levels. And I want us to think of decentering as the same way. Maybe decentering is our 2x zoom lens, or I'm sorry, our ego, or our typical way of thinking is our 2x zoom lens. Actually, I should say 1x. And then on the iPhone, at least, you can zoom into 3x. And the new phone, you can zoom into 5x, right? So you're zooming in and you're seeing the tiny details. But there's also this other zoom that lets you zoom back and see a wider perspective. Mindfulness and decentering helps remind us that we're the 1x, but there's a 0.5x and a 0.25x magnification in which we're just a tiny part. And at some point, we are just the tiny detail that the 5x is showing us in the same frame. So I don't want to take the analogy too far, but think about that. Decentering means taking ourselves out of the center of the world and saying, wow, if I zoom out, I can actually see myself among everyone else. And when we do that, something happens because we have a shared humanity with everyone, and it's not about us. And I don't think we should be judgmental to selves that everything that we do and say is from our own perspective, but it's true. We should own that. Everything I say and everything I do is biased based on my lived experience. And same it is with every other person. The problem is we don't recognize that, and we can't have a conversation about that because everyone else has their own lived experience. And so we have to, as leaders, zoom out, decenter, take ourselves out of the center of the world. And when we do attention, as in I pay attention deeply to you and to others, and I do it in a way in which I continually work on decentering, that's how I define mindfulness. So the high attention is the what, through decentering, through less ego, through understanding that there's a larger set of lived experiences that our colleagues and loved ones and others have, right? That's a decentered perspective. That type of attention, decentered attention, that's where we really live into the benefits of mindfulness. And if we think about what a transformative leader is doing, it's embracing mindfulness. And so on our journey so far, we've been defining what a transformative leader is as we unpack it. First and foremost, leadership is a set of influence behaviors. It is not a position. It is not a title. It is not reserved for the person or people at the top. It is all of us. The key and maybe only role in leadership is to make people feel valued and build deep relationships. And when deep relationships exist, we do amazing things. So we be first, and then we do, and we embrace mindfulness, which includes attention and deep decentering, which is way less about ourselves and more about others. And remember, I told you at the beginning, this beautiful framework of leadership is one of the oldest ones. It's kind of fallen out of discussion, but it was my dissertation topic. So it's near and dear to my heart. 15 or so years ago, this idea of situational leadership, it's about self, it's about others, and it's about the situation. And so if you think about what mindfulness is doing, is reminding the leader it's not about him or herself. It's about others and self and situation. It's a decentered perspective. We're zooming out. We're using that 0.5 lens, and we're seeing it a bit differently. Okay, so we've covered most of the components of transformative leadership. I know we are headed toward 1 p.m. and it's a short session. I wonder what questions you may have at this point as we've kind of really embraced the key components of transformative leadership. And hopefully you see somewhere in there where maybe you could do something a little bit different. Maybe your micro correction is something you can commit to at the end of this session with regard to decentering or mindfulness. So what thoughts might you have? I want to give some space.
Yeah, Chris, this is Carlos. I'm going to raise a question. A lot of your focus has been on kind of the personal and how we can own how we show up in a space or in a situation. Can you speak to us a little bit about perhaps when we're interacting with someone else who maybe is in that positional leader role and these attributes you described seem to be absent or not as present as we'd like? Are there tips or ways that we can engage sort of those barriers, those negatives that we listed out about when we have to interact with settings or individuals like that? How do we enter into those spaces, if you will?
Great question. Very difficult question. I wish I had a magic wand and we could specifically declare exactly what to do. It's a common question, though. I think you worded it a little bit differently, but I think there's a core question that comes up often with this work that you're speaking to, and it's how do we impact systems, really? And so I didn't get to this, but thanks for getting there with me. Is one of the final components of transformative leadership is that we change self and we change the system. But it's changing self first, and then we change the system. And so I think one of your colleagues said early on, how do we define leadership? Well, it's about setting the example. And so I recognize that I'm not going to give you an answer that is earth-shattering and you wish I could, that I wish I could give you, but I do believe it is as simple as changing ourselves. And we do show up differently, and we act differently, and we put out a different level of energy around that, and we can communicate better and our needs better. And so I could see a scenario in which, Carlos, you're embracing these ideas and you're continually working on them, and people see it, right? Some of the most amazing work that I get to be a part of with my MBA students and with leaders that I coach, it's the colleagues at work that see the difference, but it's their partners and loved ones and family members at home. Like, they see it. When we embrace these ideas, people see it and they kind of want to know about it. And I think, you know, at the deep level of what you're asking, it's my belief through my work that we're all running around so ego-based. Doesn't mean in the sort of grandiose ego way that we think of the word ego, but maybe in this way that, like, it's just about me, and I can't see it any differently. And so that tends to lead, and I think environments, maybe, you know, like VCU, I'm not saying we're unique, but in this turbulent, challenging time financially, with the world, I mean, there's a lot going on. I think more than ever, we embrace a scarcity mindset. And with a scarcity mindset, ego is on full display. And then I think maybe we're talking at each other. We're not talking with each other, and we're expecting the worst. And remember, if we begin with the end in mind, and we're sort of already going in expecting the worst, right? Like, what ways in which our mind and our body, like, tight and stressed, and then how do we make that interaction worse, right? And so, you know, the quote that I have on my refrigerator, and many of you probably have everywhere in your lives, is like, be the change you want to see in the world. It's a quote I keep coming back to. And like I said, I recognize I'm not going to give you a silver cloud idea there, on exactly how to do it. But I do believe we put in that time and that work, and we shape the relationship as we go. It's an easy thing that I can leave for you in the chat. But I just published a paper that super nerdy, and it's a theory thought piece, but it really makes the case of this decentering and attention. And it says that if I show up with, I could either be high decentering, or I can either be high attention, or well, it doesn't matter the details. I'll send you the paper, but here's the idea: is that I can show up as a one person a certain way, and the person I'm interacting with can show up. And so in the paper, we look at all these different combinations of, like, am I really mindful? And is that person really mindful? Is there a power difference between me and that person? Yes or no? And so we look at all these different scenarios on how mindfulness can shape the trajectory of that relationship. And so every interaction is an opportunity to move the trajectory of the relationship toward more positivity, more neutrality, or more negativity. And so we specifically kind of build out scenarios of what that could look like. So it's a open access journal, which is awesome. So I can absolutely leave that in the chat for y'all to read if you wish. It's dense, but there's some hopefully nuggets in there that you can take.
Any other?
Yeah, I believe we have time for one more, maybe.
Yeah.
So a leader should not be someone who throws her way around, but to influence someone, the leader must have some kind of ability to have some influence.
It broke up a little bit. I'm having trouble understanding the first row. Is it possible to put that in the chat, Carlos, or whoever is monitoring the?
So say that again for me.
So leader should not be someone who throws her way
Mhm.
around, but leader also needs to influence someone.
Yeah.
So to give us some advice how they can influence people. It's not only to be nice,
Yeah.
to respect someone. You have to have someone who influence people.
So the question is around advice on our ability to influence others, not simply around position or title, or, you know, I'm gonna be nice, so then I'll gain friends, if you will. So how do we go about on this journey of influencing absent the ego model, I guess? Yeah.
Good question. And I think we could spend hours on sort of each of the different components of transformative leadership. And so maybe I'll leave us with a couple. You know, one of the ideas that is pretty transformative, I think, is that, you know, we should and can lead with this idea that the wisdom is in the room, right? I mean, so this is a session in which it was quick, and I wanted to give you, you know, some new ways to think. But you can probably tell from my style, it's very much about let's craft this narrative together. I kind of have an idea of where I want to go, but I got there with your words and ideas, and we crafted it together, which brings me into the experience with you. I'm not a wise person that has the knowledge. I'm a guide, I'm a facilitator. And so, you know, what comes to mind with your question is that transformative leaders embrace the wisdom is in the room mentality. And we think about what the most people want. We all said we want leaders to do this, is to make us feel valued, to make us feel heard, to make us feel important, to make us feel all these things. And so I wonder if it's just as simple as acknowledging whoever we are as a leader, acknowledging that people have ideas and thoughts, and they want to feel valued, and they want to feel important. And if we begin with that, then we ask more questions, and we say, you know, so we feel it in our body when someone says something. I don't get it. I don't like it. Maybe the words they use are maybe even insulting. But I think if I've learned, and I would offer to you, can you just let the shoulders down? And can you say, you know, that's an interesting perspective. Can you tell me more what you mean? I don't understand. And when I do that, when I see leaders do that, I think it creates this space where the other person feels heard. There's something going on there, and we can't change that other person, but we can change the dynamic and the energy in the room. And if we don't rise to that challenge, and we seek to be curious and to connect and to understand, then that person feels valued. And then we meet that check mark, and then we feel valued because we recognize, well, I don't know all the answers. I hear what they're saying, but I'm jumping to conclusions maybe. And maybe they are just being a jerk. And that's a whole other scenario. Like we could do another workshop on that, on abusive kind of stuff. But it's amazing when we approach it that way, what can happen, because it lets that ego kind of go. And I believe, and I haven't empirically studied this, but others have. I mean, we're really reducing the fight or flight response. And I think most of us are running around oftentimes just reacting, doing, never being, and never responding. We're reacting, and reacting is a place where we're not at our best. I mean, I'll speak from experience. Like when I'm stressed and when I'm angry, like that's when I say a hurtful word to my husband, or I'm less patient with the puppy, or like I'm not at my best. Like I would describe myself as XYZ. And when I'm tired and I'm stressed and I got fight or flight going on, that's when I mess up being XYZ, right? Like I don't live out my full who I am when those things happen. And so that's what I would just encourage. Again, going back to starting with the beginning with the end in mind, and understanding that people want to feel that valued, and that we have a pause button. We can actually pause in the craziest times. We don't have to respond immediately, and we don't have to go on this negative journey. Now, please understand that I don't do this any better than anyone else. I think I can help us understand it, but it's also so hard to do, and it requires micro corrections over time, but we got to believe that we can do it. And then I think we can. So I know we are at time. Maybe if I could just recap a second, this idea that I'll leave you with, that transformative leaders embrace people first. It's the human first, the human sitting across from you first. And that feels different. And then we do amazing things. We know and acknowledge and care for the human first, and then we do amazing things. Because guess what? We won't always agree. We'll get mad at each other. We'll say hurtful words. But because we have a deep and caring relationship, we can borrow against it and we're going to be fine. But if we don't know each other, if we don't care about each other, if I don't know your heart and I don't know your intention, then I take your words negatively and it hurts the relationship, right? So we embrace people first, we build deep relationships, and then we get to the work of doing things. And we're always on a stage as a leader. Hopefully no one leaves this session thinking, well, leadership's something for someone else to do above me in the organizational hierarchy. I took that away from you. You can't ever declare that again, hopefully. We're all leaders at all times, at all places, and it's a journey. It's a set of practices. We can and need to do better to create more belonging and care in our world. And I will leave you right there. Apologies for being 2 minutes behind. I like to let you out on time, but thank you to the leadership team that invited me, and I'm inspired by the work you're doing this week in creating more inclusive and places where people belong. So thank you for this work, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining us.